the United States and Israel launched a coordinated attack on Iran, targeting key military bases, missile systems, and advanced air defense positions across multiple strategic regions. Multiple U.S. and Israeli precision strikes hit Iranian strategic locations at the same time, showing a highly planned and large-scale opening military operation. Iranian missile systems and air defenses came under heavy pressure as the first wave of U.S. and Israeli attacks continued across several important military zones. Iran responded quickly by launching multiple missiles toward Israel and U.S.-linked bases across the Gulf, marking the beginning of a strong retaliation phase. Iranian missiles crossed into multiple regions, with several intercepted by defense systems while others continued forward and successfully reached their intended targets. U.S. and Israeli forces continued follow-up strikes, targeting deeper Iranian military infrastructure, including storage sites, launch facilities, and command-related positions. Iran launched another wave of missiles and drones toward Israel and U.S. positions, expanding its retaliation across wider regions and increasing operational pressure. Israel and U.S. bases across the region remained on high alert as Iranian missile and drone threats continued approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. U.S. and Israeli air operations intensified further, focusing heavily on Iranian launch facilities, missile stockpiles, and high-value strategic military positions across different zones. Iran maintained strong pressure by sending additional drones and missiles toward key Israeli locations and U.S.-linked targets, continuing its structured retaliation efforts. The conflict expanded across multiple regions as U.S. and Israeli operations continued against Iranian military assets, increasing tension across a wider operational environment. U.S. and Israeli forces carried out precision strikes on Iranian command centers and logistics hubs, aiming to weaken coordination and reduce operational effectiveness. Iran responded with sustained missile launches toward Israeli cities and U.S.-linked facilities, maintaining continuous offensive pressure despite ongoing strikes on its infrastructure. Intensity drone activity increased significantly as Iran deployed multiple coordinated waves across airspace, covering long distances toward Israeli and U.S. military positions. Several locations across the region reported visible damage and operational disruption as strikes and counterstrikes continued without slowing down. The scale of operations increased as both U.S., Israeli forces and Iran continued active engagement, showing no signs of de-escalation across multiple fronts. U.S. and Israeli strikes targeted Iranian missile bases and storage facilities again, aiming to reduce Iran's ability to launch further coordinated attacks. Iran expanded its retaliation toward Israeli defense systems and U.S.-linked bases, increasing the range and frequency of missile and drone deployments. Pressure, defense systems across Israel and U.S. bases remained fully active as incoming threats continued from different directions, maintaining constant operational readiness. Coordinated strike waves from U.S. and Israeli forces continued against high-value Iranian targets, focusing on weakening long-term military capabilities. Iran launched additional coordinated missile strikes toward Israeli cities and U.S.-linked bases, increasing pressure across multiple regions and maintaining continuous retaliation efforts. The conflict expanded further as U.S. and Israeli operations continued across Iranian territory, drawing more strategic zones into active military engagement. Several high-value areas reported disruption and visible damage as repeated strikes and counterstrikes continued across multiple operational regions. Both U.S.-Israeli forces and Iran increased the intensity of operations, showing a clear shift toward sustained and large-scale military engagement. U.S. and Israeli forces targeted Iranian logistics hubs, supply routes, and communication networks to weaken coordination and reduce operational effectiveness. Iran responded by increasing drone deployments toward Israeli and U.S. military assets, expanding its reach across wider airspace and multiple directions. Israeli and U.S.-linked defense systems remained fully active, as incoming missile and drone threats continued from different directions simultaneously. Strategic strikes from U.S. and Israeli forces continued targeting Iranian infrastructure, focusing on long-term disruption of military capabilities and operational systems. Iran launched sustained missile waves across multiple fronts, maintaining offensive pressure despite continued strikes on its strategic and military infrastructure. Key operational areas across the region experienced ongoing disruption as both sides continued active military exchanges without slowing down. The pace and scale of operations increased significantly as more strike waves and retaliation efforts were launched across multiple regions. U.S. and Israeli air and naval forces coordinated new strike operations against Iranian strategic military positions and high-value infrastructure targets. Iran responded with combined missile and drone attacks toward Israeli and U.S.-linked positions, maintaining pressure across multiple active fronts. Defense systems across Israel and U.S. bases remained under constant operational stress due to continuous incoming threats from Iranian forces. U.S. and Israeli strike waves focused on weakening Iranian missile launch capabilities and reducing its ability to sustain further coordinated attacks. Iran launched another series of retaliatory missile and drone strikes toward Israeli cities and U.S.-linked military installations across the region. Damage reports continued increasing as multiple areas across the region faced ongoing disruption due to sustained military exchanges. The conflict spread into wider operational zones, involving additional regions and increasing the overall scale of engagement. Both sides continued increasing operational intensity, with no signs of de-escalation visible across any active fronts. U.S. and Israeli forces maintained coordinated operations targeting Iranian strategic infrastructure, continuing efforts to weaken long-term military capabilities. U.S. and Israel conducted strikes on Iranian missile launch systems. Iran launched additional missiles toward Israeli and U.S.-linked bases. Defense systems remained active across all targeted operational zones. Multiple areas reported disruption due to continuous exchanges. The conflict spread further across multiple strategic regions. U.S. and Israeli forces maintained strikes on Iranian infrastructure targets. Iran launched drone waves toward Israeli and U.S. military assets. Continuous threats kept defense systems engaged across regions. Several operational zones remained unstable due to ongoing strikes. Military exchanges intensified, with no signs of slowing down. U.S. and Israel targeted Iranian military storage and command facilities. Iran responded with sustained missile launches toward regional targets. Defense systems stayed active against continuous incoming threats. Multiple regions experienced disruption as exchanges continued actively. The conflict continued, with ongoing strikes and responses unresolved.